hello, Courier Nation. Welcome to the Deliver on Your Business podcast, where you are the boss. Each week, we talk about how to make the most of your business as an independent contractor, as a courier delivering for gig economy apps like Grubhub, DoorDash, Postmates, Uber Eats, and so many others.
I am the voice of Night Industry 2000's microprocessor. Kitt for easy reference. A Kitt if you prefer.
Well, Courier Nation, does anybody remember the Knight Rider? I'm kind of dating myself, aren't I, with that one? It was a favorite show for me. I think it was enough of a geek back in my college days that, you get into the talking car thing, the tech, the future stuff, all that kind of struck a chord. I know the drawback was you had David Hasselhoff, who I always thought was kind of the 80s version of William Shatner when it came to acting, You can interpret that however you want to interpret that. But I don't know, those of us who are old enough to remember, who would have thunk that we'd be the modern version of Michael Knight, right? We're driving around, we're saving the world. Well, okay, we're stopping the bad guy. Okay, I guess how about feeding the good guys? How about that? All right, so we're not exactly on a world-saving mission, but we do have technology, and we've got some amazing tech out there. And that's what I want to talk about today. This stuff that we've got available that the Hoff and Kitt would be envious today of back in those days. But I got to admit, I wouldn't mind having that Trans Am to go driving around in for my deliveries. But for this week's episode, let's talk about tech and delivery. Now, we've got talking cars. Okay, we don't have the talking cars, but we got the talking smartphones in our cars. And if you got a stereo with Bluetooth, well, maybe you do have a talking car, right? Now, in my opinion, one of the most valuable things that we've got from a tech standpoint is that voice assistant technology. It's also probably one of the most underutilized things, and maybe because it takes a little bit of learning to get to know. But, you've got Siri, you've got Bixby with the Samsung phones, you've got Google Voice Assistant, there's Amazon Echo, and now they've got an auto version of it. And now I can speak from experience with, Bixby and the Google Voice Assistant and even Amazon Echo. I don't have an iPhone, though, so my wife does, but I don't know enough about how well Siri works in some situations. I know that's one of those things that there's some things that Siri does better. There's some things that, the Samsung and the Google do a little bit better. And Amazon, well, if you want to order stuff, that's good. I'm maybe not as impressed with the Echo or with Alexia, especially when it comes to functionality with what we do. But to a certain extent, it is kind of like we have talking cars, especially if you've got Bluetooth or direct connection to your stereo. But I know we can't tell the car itself what to do. We're not quite there yet, but there's a lot of applications that specifically they help us get around and, more importantly, they keep us safe. Some things that can help us become a little more profitable. So I want to talk about some of that stuff. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is, we're getting into those voice assistants, and let's talk about using those assistants to keep your hands on the wheel. I think that's one problem with what we do is we've got everything works on the app and we got to rely on that app, but we also have to drive. So you have to be very careful about not getting too involved with your app or with your phone so that you become dangerous as a driver, either to yourself or anybody else. And honestly, I think that's one of the reasons that probably insurance rates are a little higher for people doing delivery work, because that is a factor. But I have found that on my Samsung phone, the combination of the Google Voice and Bixby is a real good one. I think each one has some strengths that the other is lacking, but they kind of offset each other very well. Now, Bixby works great when it comes to operating the phone, and I can give it very specific commands to open up an app. So if an offer comes in for DoorDash, I can say, "Hi, Bixby, open Dasher." And I don't know if you heard the little sounds in the background there, but it'll actually open up the app and take me right to it. Because like it says, let's say if I'm listening to a podcast or something while I'm driving, I don't want to go and try and touch the phone and pull up the app and everything just to see where that delivery offer is. So I can just tell it what to do. And that I think can be huge. But And the other thing I can do then is, when I get done with that, especially the problem with DoorDash app is when I get an offer, it'll knock whatever I'm streaming offline. So I can say, "Hi, Bixby, open Spotify." And with that, it just resumes and I don't have to touch the phone. The other cool thing I think with Bixby that I think sets them apart from many of the others is you can get into some real specific commands with that. So like, for example, you could give a specific instruction that says, "Hi, Bixby, open YouTube and search for Paid to Drive." Now, the technology isn't real complete yet on this by any means. I don't like waiting a second or so to wake the assistant up. And I do understand that Siri is a little better in that regard. But, sometimes when you're doing the voice recognition, it's still not totally complete. I try searching for Entree Courier and it searches for Andre Courier. And I tried searching for UDM and it searched for YOUDM. So that's why I had to go with Paid to Drive just to kind of pull that up. But I do understand, though, that you can train it a little bit better. And sometimes when you're driving around, though, you don't want to mess with that because, again, it's a safety thing. But like one thing I did was I asked, it's cool that I can ask it to read texts to me, but it can be kind of funny sometimes in that way. I'll show you. "Hi, Bixby. Read my last text."
There are 20 messages found. Messages from 8,647,744,147 at yesterday 7:47 p.m.
Thank you, Bixby. So if you didn't notice that, that was reading the phone number to you. So you go through all of that before you ever get to the message. So that can be kind of clunky. But, oh man, I tell you what, though, that technology still, even with all of its issues, is still such a long way away from like my first Samsung Epic, which is my first smartphone ever. But, and this is only scratching the surface, really, But I found that there are some things that work better with the Google Assistant. And it's also got a wake up that is like, "Okay, Google." But, for searching, for navigation, sometimes for just asking questions, it works very nicely. And you can ask it questions and have it read things back to you. If I have to text a customer, the voice recognition technology on phones is getting really good as well. And I think that helps an awful lot when I'm trying to let a customer know, because I can just do that all through voice and not have to fiddle with the phone. So now one quick tip that I've learned if you're on an Android phone is get the Gboard keyboard, because it trains a little bit better. So for example, like, when I say DoorDash using voice recognition, I think on other keyboards that are on the phone, when I've got those active, it just says door and then shows the dash symbol. And so that's just a little tip there on the side. But another thing is that sometimes you can use your voice assistant to make your delivery decisions. Now, you hear me talk about this a lot. I use a 40-cent rule when deciding on deliveries, that a delivery has to pay 40 cents a minute or more to be worthwhile. Now, that requires getting an estimate of how long a delivery is going to take. And when I get an offer screen and I see where the restaurant is, I see the general area where the customer is, then I'll do a quick inquiry. "Okay, Google, how long will it take to drive to the Falafel House?"
By car, the trip to Falafel House and Grill is 11 minutes with light traffic.
"Okay, Google, how long will it take to drive from the Falafel House to Sheridan and Evans?"
It takes 7 minutes to drive from Falafel House and Grill to West Evans Avenue and South Sheridan Boulevard.
"Thank you.
I'm here to help."
And there you go. There's times I'm just not totally sure. I might have a pretty good idea, but maybe with traffic or something like that. And I find that usually the Google app is pretty accurate as far as the estimated travel time. And you can put those together, get a pretty good idea how much time a delivery is going to take. And that helps you deliver or calculate your price per minute that you're going to get. The wild card is always going to be your wait time at the restaurants and if you're in an apartment or something like that. But as you get experience with those restaurants, you get a pretty good idea there. Now, another thing we want to talk about is using your tech to get to the customer or to get to the restaurant. Now most of the apps, you've got an option to choose which navigation program you want to use. And usually the choice is between Waze or Google Maps, or, Apple's got its own navigation. I know a lot of people that really swear by Waze, and there are a lot of great functions on Waze. It's WAZE if you're not sure. They've got some innovative things on there. They do a lot of crowdsourcing as far as knowing what's going on traffic-wise. And but personally, I found them just to be glitchy enough times. There's times where it just seems like the app is on crack, It's just trying to send me all sorts of weird directions. Sometimes I know it's trying to do shortcuts, but sometimes those shortcuts aren't well thought out. And eventually, I just ended up going back to Google Maps. Now, I want to give a shout out to Dash Bridges on Twitter, because I asked a question out there, what are you using? And he brought up a good point. He says a lot of times he finds that the app itself works real well. And now he does DoorDash mostly. And, when you get close to the customer, one thing that happens with Google Maps is a lot of times it'll say, we're here. And then it just pops up with a picture. And you're not sure if you're right in front of the customer. It's not. But you can pull up the app. I know you can do it on DoorDash, and I know you can do it on Grubhub, where you can kind of tap on that and it'll get you a pretty accurate picture of where you are. And especially at night, or the weather's bad, you can't see the street signs. A lot of times the app itself will get you right there. Now, Uber Eats, it kind of has its own navigation in it. So there are a lot of things I think in the app sometimes that, we lose sight of, maybe how much they can do. And I'll tell you one thing when I'm talking about apps, it's getting a little bit off target here, but the widget on DoorDash, if you've got a phone that supports the widget, it's awesome for the information that it provides you. But anyway, that's getting off track a little bit. I apologize. Now, one challenge, though, when you're navigating, especially to the customer, is when you get to an apartment complex or an apartment building. And I have learned that Murphy's Law is very true, that the apartment that you want to get to is at the very last possible entrance that you could try. And if you start in one area of the apartment building, it's always on the opposite end of the building, And now I know here in Colorado, they've got the marijuana laws now, but I will swear that apartment designers have been smoking that stuff a long time before that was legal here, because some of these buildings, the way they are numbered, there's no rhyme or reason, there's no consistency from one complex to the other, and then you get the GPS. Sometimes it'll take you right to the right building in a complex. And I think a lot of that depends on whether or not, when they order from the app, whether they're using their GPS as the location finder or if they're entering an address. If they enter an address, it just dumps you out maybe at the entrance of the complex. And then you got to figure out where that's at. So I really recommend one thing you might want to check out. There is an app that is called Beans, Beans. And essentially, it's a database of apartment locations. And I just started trying it because of a recommendation I saw. And it's actually pretty good now here's the thing though, is that it's only got some apartments or some complexes in its database. I don't know what they're doing to maybe update or keep it up to date, but when they've got it, it's awesome. Because I find, in some complexes that, if they're not listed, what it'll do is you put in the address for it and it'll just show the little Google symbol next to it. But if it's got it in their database, it has like their little logo that shows up in the address bar. And then you can enter the actual apartment number. And what it will do is it'll show you what building in the complex it's at. But it'll not only do that, but it will show you then, it gives you like the little apartment thing, a little locator arrow pointing over the exact part of the building that apartment is in. And folks, that has been huge for me already. I mean, I've only, used it a few days, but when you know exactly where to go, that is huge. You know exactly which entrance to go into, because I don't know if you're like me. How many times have you walked into, you got into the hallway in an apartment building and you head down the wrong direction thinking that makes sense, but nobody ever makes sense the way they number these things, And so that can be a huge time saver, really. And, when time is worth money, that's a big thing. So I really recommend you check that out. So what about tech that can help you run your business? Now, here's a couple of different things that I have found to be really useful. Now, one thing that I want to bring up, it's, one thing I want to suggest you think about is it's not really an app. And maybe it really kind of goes back to earlier what we were talking about is getting around. But If your car doesn't have a stereo that is, Android or Apple compatible with a big screen on it, it might be worth upgrading, especially it depends on how much you're driving. I know they cost a bit, but I've got one. I put it in. It's an aftermarket into a 20-year-old Buick. I might be the only 20-year-old Buick that has a big screen Android Auto stereo with a backup camera, but it has been so worth it, folks. I mean, for one thing, I can plug my phone into that and then just pop up the navigation there on that. It's got a backup camera that has been just a lifesaver when it comes to parallel parking, And you got to do that a lot when you're doing delivery stuff. So, that's one thing to think about. It's not quite an app on the phone, but it integrates and helps your car integrate a little bit better. So you want to see if you can get at least a stereo that ties in with your phone a little bit in some way, if nothing else with Bluetooth. Another app that I have used, I use this a lot, is Google Sheets. I know it's very simple, but I do a lot of tracking on my deliveries. And I jot down every start time and the mileage for each delivery because I want to know delivery by delivery. What am I making? What am I profiting per hour? And I want to see how I'm doing through the day. So I've put together a little spreadsheet that, and with Google Sheets, you can go back and forth between your phone and the computer and things like that. And I know there's some others that'll do that type of thing, but I used to keep a notebook, and then I started thinking, well, why don't I just do this on Google Sheets? Because then I don't have to do data entry afterwards. Here's another one to think about. I've been dabbling with it, but I'm still not sold, but I'll throw this out for you anyway. There's a program called Hubspot, Hubspot. It's called a CRM, or Customer Relations Management Database. Think about things like Salesforce, or if you're really old school, the old program called ACT. And it's something that's, it's designed more for businesses. It's about keeping track of your customers, keeping track of your interactions with your customers. It's for tracking sales, different things like that. So you wouldn't think of it usually for doing delivery, but I've been kind of playing with it a little bit because it's also good for tracking like the restaurants and making notes on different things about the restaurants. Some people will keep a notebook about that. Some people will keep a spreadsheet, but this is more in a database format, so you can just pull it up based on whoever it is. And I don't know, I'm kind of on the fence about it. I think, the other thing where it could be really helpful is sometimes when you've got a problem customer and there's an address, and you could actually put an address in there and see if it pulls up. I'm still kind of on the fence about it because it can be kind of clunky getting it set up. If you're having to take time to enter in information to set up the restaurant to begin with, maybe that could be more counterproductive. But it's something to think about. It's something. And one of the problems with HubSpot, though, is because it is a business type of thing, you've got to have a domain name to be able to get that set up. It's, so, and that might limit a lot of people, although getting a domain name and just a real cheap website so that you can enter that in, if the program is going to be worth using, that might be worth it just for that. I don't know. Another area where tech makes a big difference is in things like your GPS and but more like for mileage tracking and for tracking your miles and tracking your finances. And this is a category that's probably worth just its own treatment all by itself. I'm always hearing the question, how should I track my miles? Now, I'm kind of old school. I write them down. I've been doing that, and because I'm tracking everything on a delivery by delivery basis, I've got it on a delivery by delivery mileage as well. But that's more for tracking profitability for each delivery. But between that, I also use GPS. Right now, I use Stride as a backup. Stride is a good app that is kind of designed around gig work, and they've got the GPS tracking, and they've also got an expense tracking feature. So you can do very fundamental, rudimentary bookkeeping with it. Personally, I don't know that I would rely solely on Stride. I still kind of like the old school with actually writing down my odometer at the beginning, at the end. Sometimes I've heard that it's a little more reliable when it comes to an audit or something like that, a lot of the auditors are still very old school in that regard. But the other problem that I have with Stride that I've had there, and I don't know how much it's Stride and how much it's just something that, when the phone glitches, then the app glitches, but there's times it just doesn't track. That I've had times where I've started it. I know I've started it, and then you get to your stop. You want to take a look at how far you've gone or something, and it didn't track anything. I've had times where it stops tracking in the middle of your trip and everything. And if you look at the history, sometimes you'll see just kind of a straight diagonal line from one point to the other, and that's the part where it wasn't tracking. And I've had times where it duplicated trips. So there's an accuracy issue that happens, and I think that's going to be when you're relying on a phone app anyway. There are just going to be issues that way. So to me, I think it makes a good backup in conjunction, but I think it's still good to go ahead and, track your actual miles, the odometer listing, things like that. It's safe. You know what I mean? Now, personally, for bookkeeping, I use Quickbooks Self-Employed. And with that, you can take pictures of receipts, and it also has a GPS tracking on the as well. And that, along with, I know there's another one called, I think it's Everlance, that does GPS tracking for you. Those you can set so that it'll actually automatically start tracking whenever you're moving. And in fact, you can do filters that make them a little better than Stride in one way, in that you got to be going a certain speed before it start tracking. That's one problem with Stride, is you get out and you got to walk a block when you're downtown or something because of parking. It'll track that block, and I don't think that really makes that much difference, a block here, a block there. But there's still, it's just kind of when you get down to an accuracy thing. I like that more automatic function in some ways. The problem with the automatic is sometimes it can be too easy to blend your personal and business stuff. And ultimately, I guess it all kind of comes down to preference as far as how you like to work with things. Nice thing about Stride is it's free. The QuickBooks Self-Employed is like $10 a month or something like that. Now, my biggest beef with any of these apps that are, for mileage tracking for your business stuff is I haven't seen any yet where you can actually pull up the history on the map and go to a particular point and be able to see what time that was you were there. And, when I've used Strava in the past for like logging runs and fitness things, bike rides and stuff like that, you could do that on that app. And I wish that one of these apps would do that, because I think from a documentation standpoint, customer says, yeah, they were never here. You've actually got the GPS proof and you can show exactly what time you were there. I think that would be good if somebody has that. So if anybody knows of a tracking app that actually has that feature, I would love to hear about that. Now, my dream app, I sit there and I think, one thing I would love to be able to develop, there's a part of me that's a geek enough that would love to kind of try and play with it, but it'd just take a ton of time. And I've done a little bit of programming way back in the day, but it was COBOL. You don't use COBOL these days for stuff. So again, I'm dating myself. But I would think it would be awesome to develop an app that could make it easier to do the tracking that I do with my spreadsheet. Because you could, let's say you set up an app where you could just tap when you start, you accept a delivery, you tap on the app and it just starts tracking the time and the distance for you. And then when you're done, you just enter how much you received for it and who you got it for. And then it just does all the rest for you to tell you, how much you made per hour, how much profit you made, all those things. Then you could do reports daily, weekly, monthly, all of that stuff. Like I said, I'm a geek that way. I like to know that stuff. But if you made it easy for people to track that stuff, I think it could be real useful. And if you wanted to get real fancy, just make it a total driver app. Throw in a thing like a database for restaurants where you can keep track of notes about that, but make it easy to enter that stuff. And even your mileage tracking, your expense tracking, just roll that all in together. So if anybody wants to develop that, I'd pay for it. Kind of to wrap up, just some final thoughts on tech and using it in our delivery work. Here's the thing, folks. There's a lot of cool stuff out there. And I've found that a lot of the things that I've mentioned here, they can save a lot of time. They can do a lot of things for you. That Beans app that I tried, the newest one, to me, so far, I found that really makes a difference. And it can shave a lot of minutes off of the apartment deliveries and things like that. Now, back when I was in telecom and we sold phone systems and phone service, things like that, we used to use what we called a technology mission statement. And we would tell our potential customers and our customers that, you know what, technology needs to help you be more profitable or more competitive. And if it doesn't do those things, don't invest in it. So sometimes we were telling people not to buy from us because it wasn't going to do anything for them, you know? It's got to have a purpose. And that's the thing that I really want to stress as we wrap this up today about tech. There's a lot of cool stuff out there. You know what I mean? I love the things we can do with our phones. I love some of the stuff that we can do out there. But you've got to ask yourself, how is it going to help you? So I really recommend when you're looking at some of those things that we talked about, you know, ask yourself 2 questions. Does it save time? Does it help you be profitable? And really the two kind of tie together. But does it save time? You know, if you listen to me much, I already talked about the 40-cent rule in making decisions on deliveries, but I also may use it as far as making decisions on type things, because the whole idea of that 40-cent rule is time is worth 40 cents a minute. You know, whatever amount of time that you set as your target, you know, and usually people think in terms of so much per hour, but break it down to the minute, because that really helps you think about what your time is worth. And so I can say $24 per hour, but when you break it down to 40 cents a minute, there's some power in that, because every minute that you waste is costing you 40 cents. Every minute that you save is earning you 40 cents. So think about that when you're talking about time. You know, is this tech, is this innovation, whatever it is you want to do, is it saving time? Because sometimes if you got to pay for it, a lot of these apps are free. If you got to pay for it, is it saving you enough time to make it worth doing? Like I mentioned, the Beans app. I mean, my gosh, that can save 10, 15 minutes sometimes at an apartment complex when you're trying to find something. I way back when I started, I had one time, I actually spent 45 minutes trying to find the customer because the instructions were terrible, the map was terrible, the apartment, and it was dark, and the customer didn't make a lot of sense trying to describe it, and I was about ready to quit that night. So think about things like that. Is it saving time? And that's one of the reasons, like I said, I'm on the fence about that HubSpot, because I haven't dug into it enough, but you know, finding time, you gotta create a record for each restaurant, and you could actually end up spending more time than you're helping yourself by that. So you got to think about that and measure stuff both ways. And the other question, is it helping your profits? You know, so things like we talked about the GPS tracking and some of those things, that if you can keep your taxes down, that's huge. Having the voice assistant that can help me very quickly make a decision, make a calculation on whether or not this delivery is worthwhile, that kind of thing can help your profits. You just want to make sure that when you're making a decision on tech, one thing you want to keep in mind, you know, tech has a learning curve. You know, when you're learning something new, like the voice assistant thing, I had to spend some time sitting down with YouTube to learn kind of how to take the best advantage of some of those things, and I've still barely scratched the surface. How much time does it take to learn? How much time does it take to set up? And is it worth it? You've just got to kind of weigh all of those things. There are a lot of things that they can make a huge difference for you, but you got to weigh everything. You know what? And there's awesome stuff out there, but weigh it. Make business decisions. Is it going to help you achieve your goals? Is it going to make you more profitable? Is it going to reduce your time? Or can you get caught up in the weeds? You know, can you start losing time because you're playing with that more than doing deliveries and it's slowing you down? So you want to be aware, always kind of keep your eyes open for the kind of stuff that can help you succeed and help you improve your business. But just be careful not to dive into something that actually works against you. So what do you think, Courier Nation? I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear ideas from you. What kind of tech do you think helps you with your delivery business? Shoot me an email at ron@entrecourier.com, or you can look up Entre Courier at Facebook or on LinkedIn or on Twitter, and give me a shout out there and let me know some things that you think would be helpful for people to know about. In the meantime, folks, let me just ask one question. Is the information that you receive from the Entree Courier website or from this podcast or any of our social media, is any of that helpful to you at all? Is it making a difference to you? Because if it is, I would love to ask if you could just share us, let people know about us, leave a review on this podcast, or just tell people about us so that we can help them as well. In the meantime, Courier Nation, the one thing that I really want to ask of you is please just go out there, take control of your life, your career, of everything that you do, because you can be in control of all of it. Take control of that. Go and be the boss.